The Committee on Homeland Security Subcommittee on Border and Maritime Security will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to examine CBP's efforts to improve staffing and port of entry infrastructure needs. I recognize myself now for an opening statement. Before we begin, I'd like to offer my condolences for Border Patrol Agent Jose D. Barraza. Yesterday morning, Agent Barraza, a canine handler, was involved in a vehicle accident with his canine Vino, and he was fatally injured. Border Patrol Agent Barraza was assigned to the Sierra Blanca station of the Big Bend sector. He is survived by his wife, Donna Ibarra, his two sons, Joey and Joss Bizarra, and his mother, Tammy Delgado, all of El Paso. Our thoughts are with his family in this difficult time, and we thank him for his service. U.S. Customs and Border Protection job is to make sure passengers and cargo that power our economy keep moving while keeping bad things and bad people out of the country. These missions require two basic prerequisites: an appropriate number of well-trained CBP officers to process travelers and trade, and a modernized infrastructure to accommodate and channel the traffic so that it moves across the border quickly and safely. However, CBP is seriously understaffed, despite Congress's recent infusion of dollars to hire an additional 2,000 officers. Land ports of entry across the country are in dire need of expansion and renovation to keep pace with increasing demand and security requirements. CBP is well below its congressionally mandated staffing level by more than 950 officers and 1,300 Border Patrol agents. Even with a recent push to hire more officers, hiring is only barely keeping up with officer attrition. We are essentially treading water. CBP's internal workflow staffing models show that we need more than 2,000 CBP officers above what CBP currently has on board, well above even what Congress has appropriated. Once CBP delivers the now late staffing report, as required under the recently enacted CBP Authorization Act, Congress will have a clearer picture of where the needs are the greatest. Filling staffing shortages is a challenge for several reasons. For starters, just last year, it took more than 460 days on average and 11 distinct steps to onboard a new officer or agent. Today, it's only marginally better. The process is down to 6 months, but I think that's just for where we have pilot programs, so I'd like to hear some clarification on that. This is still a very long time. We are losing far too many good applicants who just throw up their hands and move on because they have given up on the process. Pre-employment polygraph examinations required by the Anti-Border Corruption Act of 2010 significantly reduce the number of applicants who make it through the process, including a disturbingly high number of seemingly qualified combat veterans. I want to make sure we are vetting potential applicants thoroughly without subjecting them to a process that is adversarial without purpose. Attrition is also something that should concern CBP and concerns us. When we have good officers and agents leaving the force in significant numbers and the hiring process is not keeping pace, we must look for novel ways to retain these professionals. At the current hiring rate, it takes between 100 and 150 applicants to go through the process to just hire one agent or officer. This means CBP needs to have hundreds of thousands of people to apply just to meet their current needs. Last year, President Obama signed a bill that I authored, the Border Jobs for Veterans Act. This was my first bill signed into law, by the way. This law allows the hiring of qualified veterans on an expedited basis and establishes programs to actively recruit military veterans to work as CBP officers. I look forward to an implementation update because we can all agree that CBP should be leveraging our military veterans who want to continue to serve their country. Turning now to infrastructure challenges. There are 167 land ports of entry nationwide. Many are in dire need of expansion or modernization. For years, funding for ports of entry has been inadequate, considering the magnitude of the requirements. If we tally the total requirements for ports of entry across the country, it comes out to an astounding $5 billion. How CBP prioritizes land ports of entry construction is not as clear as it should be. Under current law, CBP is required to present a 5-year infrastructure plan to Congress on a routine basis, which I understand will be delivered shortly. What Congress is looking for in such a plan is a rational decision-making process for selecting and funding infrastructure based on specific criteria, impacting the economy, the level of traffic, and the necessary security enhancements. The main border crossing in my district, located in Douglas, Arizona, is a prime example of the confusion that exists with the current process. The Douglas crossing point is one of 6 ports of entry in Arizona, and the city of Douglas has been attempting to secure the approval of the new commercial port of entry with DHS since 2012. Unfortunately, determining how to further this vital project still remains not only relatively unclear, but frustratingly difficult for my community. Mexico is my state's largest trading partner, and over the past 5 years, shipments south alone have increased 60%. The Douglas port currently accounts for nearly $4 billion in trade through two-way truck traffic, a figure that has grown 5% annually since 2010. But what is hard to measure is the opportunity cost of inadequate and aging infrastructure that causes bottlenecks and long wait lines. We may never know how much commerce Douglas is not seeing because of the cargo may be shifting to another port of entry not in such dire need of modernization, or people that are crossing on foot who just decide not to come anymore because it's just taking too long. In 2003, the Arizona Department of Transportation determined that the existing Douglas port of entry will not allow CBP to adequately meet its mission within the next 5 years. That deadline is rapidly approaching, and I'm extremely interested in moving along projects, whether it's improvements or expansions of the existing port or building a new port altogether, that will ensure that commerce continues to move in an efficient manner for the citizens of Southern Arizona and also for them to remain safe. I hope that the witnesses today can help this subcommittee find solutions that will ease the staffing shortages and prioritize infrastructure spending in a transparent and justifiable way. The chair now recognizes the acting ranking minority member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Higgins, for any statement he may have.
I want to thank the chair, and I'm pleased to serve as ranking member today, particularly given the topic at hand, staffing and infrastructure, America's ports of entry. My congressional district consists of portions of Erie and Niagara counties, including the cities of Buffalo and Niagara Falls, and sits adjacent to America's maritime border with Canada along the Niagara River and the eastern shores of Lake Erie. Buffalo is home to the Peace Bridge, the busiest passenger crossing on the northern border, and a crucial link between the economies of Western New York and Southern Ontario and our two great nations. Each year, $40 billion in trade crosses the Peace Bridge, spurring $227 billion in economic activity. Niagara County is home to 3 more international crossings, the Rainbow Bridge, the Whirlpool Bridge, and the Lewiston-Queenston Bridge, which are also crucial to travel and tourism in the region. Cross-border travel, the efficient flow of goods and people across the border, and the security of our ports of entry are vital to the communities that I represent. Unfortunately, U.S. Customs and Border Protection's Office of Field Operations continues to be understaffed at ports of entry based on the agency's own staffing model. Staffing shortages slow legitimate crossers and makes it more difficult for law enforcement officials to spot the handful who may pose a concern. In addition to staffing challenges, Customs and Border Protection operations at the Peace Bridge are hindered by inadequate infrastructure, including insufficient booth capacity for a port facility of its size, as well as a dysfunctional plaza that results in crossing inefficiencies. In my congressional district, we see the slowdowns, particularly on summer weekends, as locals and tourists alike seek to enter the United States from Canada. That season is right around the corner, and I know I will be hearing from my constituents and area businesses about their concerns. I hope to hear from our CBP witnesses today about what they are doing to increase staffing for ports of entry, including hiring 2,000 CBP officers funded by Congress in recent years, both in the near term and over the long term. Similarly, we know that additional investments in port of entry infrastructure are necessary to deal with increasing cross-border traffic and trade and evolving security threats. New programs such as land preclearance will require additional infrastructure but will pay significant returns on those investments. I have long been a proponent of preclearance at the Peace Bridge in Buffalo. Because of the unique infrastructure, location, and space constraints we face in the Buffalo Port of Entry and the existence of sufficient acreage on the Fort Erie side, the Peace Bridge was chosen for a preclearance pilot in 2004. Now that full preclearance is being revived, I believe the Peace Bridge would be ideally suited for the first land pre-clearance site. I was greatly encouraged by the announcement made last month by President Obama and Prime Minister Trudeau regarding the program, and I'm proud to be an original co-sponsor of legislation that would provide the legal framework needed to move forward with expanded pre-clearance. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about how the Department of Homeland Security, the General Services Administration, with the support of Congress, can properly staff and resource our nation's port of entry, including the ones in my congressional district and those of my colleagues here today. Finally, I'm very glad to be joined by Tony Reardon, National President of the National Treasury Employees Union, which represents rank and file CBP officers, including many of my constituents. Again, thank the witnesses for joining us, and I look forward to your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Madam Chairman, brief opening statement. Thank you
Without
for that.
objection.
I've been on this subcommittee for into my 6th year, and this issue has come up time and again. You know, Ronald Reagan used to talk about a shining city on the hill, and he said if that shining city on the hill had to have walls, then it needed to have gates to allow the normal flow of goods, commerce, and natural immigration. I want to thank all the leaders that are here today testifying for the work they do. You know, Mr. O'Rourke from El Paso, Texas, talked extensively in this committee about trade at the border and how important it was to El Paso, and I know how important it is in Nogales because I have been there and seen the 18-wheelers lined up on the Mexican side trying to come into this country. But the vital component is inspection of those 18-wheelers to make sure that contraband, illegal aliens, drugs, you name it, don't come into this country. And it could be, you know, citrus greening fruit that doesn't need to come in and infect United States citrus. So there's an important component. And so I think this is a vital topic, and I'll applaud you for this because being from South Carolina, we're about as far away from the southern and the northern border as you can imagine. But we fully understand the threats that are posed to this nation that could come across, not just across the open border areas, but through our normal ports of entry. And so they've got a vital role to play. I will note that in the last 10 years, the number of CBP personnel, Border Patrol personnel, has doubled to about 20,000, I think. I don't know what the optimal number is. I hope we delve into that a little bit because just increasing manpower and not increasing effectiveness of that manpower isn't always the answer. Giving them the tools they need, the ability to do their job, getting the administration out of their way, and allowing them to protect the country because that's what our constituents expect. So I thank you for this hearing. I look forward to the testimony, and I appreciated the ranking member's comments as well, who understands this issue as well. So thank you, and I yield back.
Absolutely. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We're pleased to be joined today by 5 distinguished witnesses to discuss this important topic. Mr. Eugene Sheed is the Acting Executive Assistant Commissioner for the Office of Enterprise Services at U.S. Customs and Border Protection. In this role, Mr. Sheed has responsibility within CBP for real estate management, including the construction, maintenance, and leasing of facilities. Prior to joining CBP in November 2006, Mr. Sheed was the first Deputy CFO for the Department of Homeland Security and also served as DHS's Budget Director from May 2003 until March 2004. Ms. Linda Jacksta is the Assistant Commissioner for Human Resources Management at the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Prior to this role, Ms. Jacksta served as the Acting Deputy Assistant Commissioner for the Office of Internal Affairs. In this capacity, she provided leadership and direction for a wide variety of functions or programs, including backgrounds and clearances and employee misconduct investigations. Mr. John Wagner is the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for U.S. Customs and Border Protection's Office of Field Operations. Mr. Wagner formerly served as Executive Director of Admissibility and Passenger Programs with responsibility for all traveler admissibility-related policies and programs including the Trusted Traveler Program, the Electronic System for Travel Authorization, the Immigration Advisory Program, and the Fraudulent Document Analysis Unit. Mr. Michael Gelber is the Deputy Commissioner for Public Buildings Service at the U.S. General Service Administration. The Public Building Service is one of the largest public real estate organizations in the world, operating more than 9,000 owned and leased properties across the United States. Mr. Gelber began his career at GSA in 1988 and has held positions in several leadership positions, including service in the Northwest and Great Lakes region. Mr. Anthony Reardon is the national president of the National Treasury Employees Union, a position he was elected to in August of 2015. A 25-year member of the NTEU, he joined the organization in 1990 as the operations manager and rose to become chief operating executive, where he oversaw budgeting and other financial matters and managed NTEU's day-to-day operations, ranging from personnel to information technology. The witnesses' full written statements will appear for the record. The chair now recognizes Mr. Sheed for 5 minutes to testify.
Good morning, Chairwoman McSally, Representative Higgins, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear this morning to discuss Customs and Border Protection's efforts to modernize land port of entry facilities in support of our mission to secure and facilitate trade and travel into and out of the United States. CBP's Facility Management and Engineering Division is responsible in coordination with GSA for the oversight, repair, and modernization of CBP's inspectional facilities at our nation's 329 ports of entry, more than half of which, as you've noted, are located along the U.S. land borders with Mexico and Canada. Most CBP land ports of entry were built to support the distinct and independent operations of pre-DHS agencies, such as the U.S. Customs Service, Animal Plant Health and Inspection Service, and the Immigration and Naturalization Service. Today, of course, our facilities and our operations are consolidated and incorporate state-of-the-art technology, professional law enforcement personnel who maintain the efficient and secure flow of cross-border trade and travel. The success of these operations depend heavily on the condition and operational utility of our inspections facilities. Many of the nation's land ports of entry were built more than 70 years ago. Even those constructed as recently as 15 years ago still require renovation or replacement to meet present-day security standards, enforcement and facilitation technologies, and the growing demand of additional processing capability. GSA and CBP work cooperatively using a multi-step process to plan for land ports of entry modernization investments. In coordination with federal, state, and local stakeholders, we conduct a strategic resource assessment to identify individual needs at each facility and use a sensitivity analysis to ascertain the relative urgency of facility needs nationwide. As a part of this assessment process, we evaluate also the environmental, cultural, historic preservation, and land acquisition requirements, as well as the likelihood of obtaining funding. We work actively in border master planning. We look at each port's activity. We work with state and local stakeholders to determine what kind of inspectional facilities and repairs are needed. After this thorough assessment, we arrive at a capital investment plan that is updated annually to align with available funding to address areas of greatest need. Due to the constrained budget environment over the last several years, funding for facilities has been limited. However, thanks to Congress's support, in January of 2014, CBP received authority to enter into partnerships with private sector and government entities at ports of entry to accept donations of real and personal property, including monetary donations and non-personnel services. This donation acceptance program provides CBP and GSA the opportunity to consider donation proposals to address local port of entry infrastructure needs which, because of our needing to prioritize at a national level, might not otherwise be addressed. These donations are expected to reduce border wait times, increase traffic throughput, create jobs, and address critical operational and regional border master plan infrastructure technology needs. CBP also continuously works to develop alternatives to full reconstruction, to find alternative and innovative ways to maximize resources and efficiencies. For example, where full reconstruction isn't possible, approaches such as stacked booths can increase throughput. High-low booths can also accommodate the processing of either commercial or passenger vehicles. These initiatives provide CBP with valuable flexibility to quickly adapt to changing port conditions, reduce the overall footprint of facilities, and improve the mutually beneficial opportunities to meet ongoing modernization needs at the land ports of entry. Chairwoman McSally, Representative Higgins, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sheed. The chair now recognizes Ms. Jacksta for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairwoman McSally, Acting Ranking Member Higgins, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, and thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. Throughout my own 30 years of service with Customs and CBP, I have seen firsthand the impact that our employees have on national security and economic prosperity. I have a deep sense of commitment and dedication to this organization, its mission, and its people. With nearly 60,000 employees in the United States and abroad, CBP has a massive and vitally important job to do. Underpinning that effort is CBP's Office of Human Resources Management, and our motto is, border security starts here. As someone who's worked in CBP's operational environment, that's a responsibility I take very seriously. Since taking office, my priority has been to strategically identify and assess the challenges associated with hiring and retaining our Air and Marine agents, Border Patrol agents, CBP officers, and other mission-critical personnel. We must be nimble, adaptive, and innovative to keep pace with an ever-changing operational landscape. I have identified 3 key factors influencing our ability to meet our staffing goals and have developed strategies to address each. The first is improving the quantity and the quality of our applicant pool. The second is decreasing the time to hire. And the third is reducing attrition. We've made progress, but clearly more needs to be done. I've established a National Frontline Hiring Program Management Office to integrate stovepiped elements of the hiring process, and significant improvements have been made. I've established a National Frontline Recruitment Command to deploy data-driven recruitment strategies to increase the quantity and the quality of CBP's applicant pool. And I'm really pleased to report that the number of applicants for frontline positions has increased from 40,000 in FY14 to over 115,000 in FY15. In addition, CBP plans to participate in over 3,000 recruitment events this fiscal year, almost double the number of events from last year. And I want to address the hiring of our veterans. Through the Border Jobs for Vets Act, we are partnering with the Department of Defense to expedite the onboarding of veterans and separating service members into frontline positions. This is groundbreaking work that has the potential to be a game changer for CBP. We are exploring new methods to offer reciprocity to veterans for elements of our pre-employment process. We are also employing the use of hiring hubs, which consolidate multiple steps of our process into a 2-day time frame, reducing the overall time to hire by more than 65%. CBP has utilized reassignment opportunities and job swap programs, and we are exploring other mobility options to address attrition. It is important to note that we rely on other federal partners for portions of our hiring process, as well as an applicant's ability to complete their part of the process in a timely fashion. We are also the only federal agency with a congressional mandate to polygraph 100% of CBP's frontline applicants. Chairwoman McSally, I had the opportunity to read your list of core values. Among excellence, integrity first, service, and teamwork was the phrase making it happen. I recognize that our challenges are significant. However, I am confident that with the continued support of this subcommittee and other members of Congress, we will continue to find new and innovative ways to make it happen for CBP. Chairwoman McSally, Acting Ranking Member Higgins, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for holding this important hearing, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Jacksta. The chair now recognizes Mr. Wagner for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Chairwoman McSally, Acting Ranking Member Higgins, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, it's a privilege to appear today before you to discuss U.S. Customs and Border Protection's resource optimization efforts to meet the challenge of growing volumes of trade and travel to the United States. The Office of Field Operations is CBP's frontline entity responsible for securing and facilitating international trade and travel at our nation's 300-plus ports of entry. Each year, we process nearly 30 million cargo containers and approximately 380 million passengers, with trade and travel volumes continuing to rise. While the continued increase in lawful cross-border commerce is a welcome benefit for the economy, it also presents several complex challenges for an organization whose frontline strength does not expand at the same rate. So to keep pace, we developed a three-part resource optimization strategy that identifies staffing requirements using a workload staffing model, streamlines business processes, and 3, promotes opportunities for public-private partnerships to support staff increases and facility improvements. Thanks to the support of Congress, the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2014 funded 2,000 new CBP officers. However, the most recent results of our workload staffing model, factoring in the additional 2,000 officers authorized in 2014, show an additional need for 2,107 officers through fiscal year 17. As Assistant Commissioner Jacksta highlighted in her statement, the Office of Field Operations works closely with the Office of Human Resources Management on several initiatives to recruit, hire, and retain the highly qualified men and women to secure our borders and facilitate trade and travel. In addition to efforts to increase staffing, we're also transforming our business processes to optimize the resources we have by leveraging technology, automating procedures for the travelers, and increasing operational efficiency by getting rid of paper forms. These business transformation initiatives will save CBP an estimated 536,000 inspection hours, in equivalent to 453 CBP officers through fiscal year 2017. Business transformation initiative savings also benefit travelers crossing in our land ports of entry. With the increased use of ready lanes for those with radio frequency identification documents, coupled with an increased participation in our trusted traveler programs, the national average vehicle wait time was 10% shorter in fiscal year 2015 than the previous year. Peak wait times have also decreased on average by 30%. And at the Southwest Land Border, the Century Trusted Travelers experienced a 73% reduction in wait times compared with non-participants. This year in the land border environment, CBP is working on automating the I-94 arrival record and the commercial truck user fee collection process. These initiatives will replace inefficient manual processes, decreasing wait times for travelers and commercial trucks, and saving critical officer inspectional hours. While CBP's efforts to modernize inspection facilities, improve business processes, and increase the number of officers has been successful, the updated workload staffing model results continue to show a need for additional capability. A significant portion of this capability is required to support our stakeholders' request to provide new or additional services and infrastructure at ports of entry across the country. We recognize the potential economic impact for new or expanded service and infrastructure, and we very much want to support these endeavors. However, due to finite resources, we're not able to always accommodate these requests. Again, thanks to the support of Congress, CBP recently received authority to collaborate with private sector and government partners through the Reimbursable Services Program and the Donations Acceptance Program to address port-specific needs for enhanced CBP services and infrastructure improvements that otherwise would not have been possible. Executive Assistant Commissioner Sheed discussed the significant opportunities the Donation Acceptance Program offers by modernizing inspection facilities. The Reimbursable Services Program Authority allows CBP to support requests from stakeholders for expanded services, including customs, agriculture, border security services, and immigration-related inspection services at the port. At land ports of entry, this authority enables CBP to open additional lanes, provide services for extended hours to reduce wait times, and expedite commercial and personal traffic. In the first 26 months of this program, CBP has entered into agreements with 28 stakeholders, providing more than 145,000 additional processing hours at the request of our partners, and accounting for the processing of more than 3.5 million travelers and nearly 525,000 personal and commercial vehicles. So legitimate travel and trade play a critical role in our nation's economic growth, and CBP recognizes this role in sustaining such growth. We'll continue to strengthen our frontline staffing efforts, modernize our facilities, and streamline our business processes, which form the essential foundation of CBP's critical security and facilitation operations at our nation ports of entry. So thank you again for holding this hearing today, and I look forward to discussing with you further.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. The chair now recognizes Mr. Gelber for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairwoman McSally, Acting Ranking Member Higgins, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Michael Gelber, and I'm the Deputy Commissioner of the U.S. General Services Administration, Public Building Service. Thank you for inviting me to this hearing on prioritizing and improving the Department of Homeland Security's Customs and Border Protection's facility infrastructure. GSA's mission is to deliver the best value in real estate, acquisition, and technology services to government and the American people. As part of this mission, GSA maintains a close partnership with CBP to meet that agency's space needs along our nation's borders. CBP is our primary partner among the federal inspection agencies stationed along America's land borders. GSA works closely with CBP to design, construct, maintain, and operate land ports of entry along more than 1,900 miles of border between the United States and Mexico, and more than 5,500 miles of border between the United States and Canada. These ports are critical to the nation's trade and security. From 2000 to 2014, the combined value of trade between the United States and Canada and the United States and Mexico via surface transport increased by over 80%, from $546 billion in 2000 to $987 billion in 2014. Safe, secure, and modern land ports along our borders are critical to ensuring an efficient flow of commerce and people that support American jobs and economic growth. Of the 167 land ports of entry along the American border, GSA manages 124, of which the government owns or partially owns 102. GSA's land ports of entry encompass more than 5.5 million square feet of space. Given the importance of these land ports of entry, GSA, in collaboration with CBP, prioritizes investments to modernize and upgrade these ports. To ensure these investments address CBP's highest priority needs, GSA relies on priorities established by CBP. Over the past 16 years, GSA has invested more than $1.8 billion from the Federal Buildings Fund to deliver more than 20 new land ports of entry along our nation's northern and southern borders. Since 2013, GSA has requested over $1 billion in support of land port modernization, including GSA's fiscal year 2017 request of $248 million to reconfigure and expand the land port of entry in Calexico, California, and $5.7 million for the design and construction of a new animal inspection facility in Pembina, North Dakota. Of these requests, Congress has provided approximately $700 million to date. Without full funding requested in the President's annual budget, GSA cannot execute the land port upgrades that are critically needed. CBP and GSA consult with stakeholder agencies at the onset of project planning and continue this relationship throughout project development and execution. If a project involves a new border crossing and/or a substantial modification of an existing crossing, GSA works closely with the Department of State, which must determine whether the project is in the national interest, justifying issuance of a presidential permit. GSA also works closely with the Department of Transportation's Federal Highway Administration and the transportation departments from the border states when planning border infrastructure projects. GSA has seen significant interest in finding funding alternatives to direct federal appropriations to support the delivery of land port projects. One tool for supporting federal efforts is Section 559, the Donation Acceptance Program, which authorizes GSA and CBP to receive donations and reimbursable services for land port of entry projects. Under this program, projects are being further assessed and developed in the cities of Donna, El Paso, and Pharr, Texas. In Donna, GSA and CBP have helped the city complete concept development for their proposal, while the El Paso and Pharr port of entry modernization projects are in concept development. GSA and CBP are currently reviewing the fiscal year 2016 donation acceptance program proposals, which may provide additional investment in infrastructure and technology at land ports of entry. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about GSA's ongoing partnership with CBP to improve the nation's infrastructure along America's borders. I welcome the opportunity to discuss GSA's commitment to strategic investment in the nation's land port of entry, and I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Gilbert. The chair now recognizes Mr. Reardon for 5 minutes. You could hit your button there.
Chairwoman McSally, Acting Ranking Member Higgins, thank you for the opportunity to testify on CBP's efforts to prioritize and improve staffing to keep pace with the country's trade, travel, and security needs. As NTEU president, I have the honor of leading a union that represents over 25,000 CBP employees who are stationed at 328 U.S. air, sea, and land ports of entry and at pre-clearance operations overseas. There is no greater roadblock to trade and travel efficiency and security needs than the lack of sufficient staffing at ports. Studies have shown that for every 1,000 CBP officers hired, 3,300 private sector jobs are created. Understaffed ports lead to long delays in travel and cargo lanes and create a significant hardship for employees and contribute to CBP's perennial low ranking in federal employee surveys. Both involuntary overtime and involuntary work assignments far from home disrupt CBP officers' family life and destroy morale. NTEU is most concerned that CBP continues to fall short in its authorized staffing levels by approximately 800 of the 2,000 CBP officers funded by Congress in 2014. CBP contends that they are unable to find eligible applicants. One factor may be that CBP is not utilizing available pay flexibilities, such as recruitment awards and special salary rates, to incentivize new and existing CBP officers to seek vacant positions at hard-to-fill ports. An example of the negative impact staffing shortages have on CBP officers can be found at San Ysidro, where CBP has instituted involuntary temporary duty assignments, or TDYs. While asserting that it would prefer to use volunteers and not involuntarily draft employees, CBP has rejected NTEU proposals that would incentivize employees to volunteer. Forced TDYs caused by ongoing staffing shortages undermine employee morale and undermine overall recruitment efforts, especially since the very best recruiters should be current CBP officers. Unfortunately, many officers would not encourage their family members or friends to seek employment with CBP. In its FY17 budget submission, CBP offered several proposals to mitigate the ongoing staffing shortage of approximately 2,100 CBP officers. One proposal, which NTEU strongly opposes, is to backfill 50 CBP officer attrition vacancies in FY17 with 50 CBP technicians in order to free up CBP officers from administrative duties. NTEU supports hiring additional CBP technicians to free up CBP officers from administrative duties as long as CBP is not reducing the current onboard goal of 23,821 CBP officers, since CBP technicians are not qualified as CBP officers. Hiring new CBP officers should be CBP's priority. A funding proposal in CBP's budget submission that NTEU strongly supports is for Congress to authorize a $2 increase in immigration and customs user fees to fund the hiring of the 2,100 additional CBP officers needed to end the current CBP officer staffing shortage. In recent years, in order to find alternative sources of funding to address serious staffing shortages, CBP received authorization and has entered into reimbursable service agreements with private sector as well as state and local government entities. NTEU believes that the RSAs are not a long-term funding solution and cannot replace the need for Congress to either authorize an increase in customs and immigration user fees or provide increased appropriations to hire additional new CBP officers without undermining CBP's mission and independence by transforming it into a pay-to-play agency. The CBP employees I represent are frustrated and their morale is indeed low. They work hard and care deeply about their jobs and their country. They understand that budgets are tight and remain dedicated to performing difficult jobs every day despite the impact of the ongoing staffing crisis. Both CBP and Congress should address these important staffing issues. CBP needs to improve its hiring process that has delayed the hiring of the 2,000 officers funded in 2014, and if Congress is serious about job creation and border security, it needs to fund the hiring of the remaining 2,107 CBP officers and the 631 agricultural specialists identified in CBP's 2016 workload staffing model. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Reardon. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. I'm going to do a couple rounds. So this first round is going to be focused on the staffing, and then I'll come back and talk about infrastructure in the second round. And Ms. Jackster, I want to start with you. As the author of the Border Jobs for Veterans Act, I believe we had an update due to us on April 15th with how that's going, which is now overdue. So can you give me an implementation update? How many veterans have been hired since that went into law? When are we going to get the report from you? And I have a number of other questions related to some of the things you mentioned in your testimony. But if a veteran has got a TS-SCI clearance, has been through an SSBI, has given all those clearances, are you still starting from scratch with a veteran going through your 11-step process? Or are you, accepting what they've already gone through to get the clearances that they have? Are you looking for waiver authorities for polygraphs for those that already have clearances, accepting their medical, their physical fitness, all the things that would fast track our veterans that we intended you to be doing by this law?
Thank you, Chairwoman McSally, and I want to thank you for sponsoring that legislation. And as I said in my opening statement, I believe that this has the potential to be a true game changer for CBP. With respect to the report that you mentioned, it's my understanding that's going through internal vetting. It has left the agency, and hopefully it will be en route to you shortly.
So it's in the black hole between the agency and Congress. Got it.
In terms of the implementation plan and the 7 goals and objectives that you outlined in the Act, I have very, very good news in terms of the level of collaboration that we've had with our partners at the Department of Defense. We have reached some significant agreements on levels of reciprocity that we would like to offer for a couple of key areas in the hiring process. One would be the medical. So when a separating service member is separating from the military, they have an exit medical. We would like to use that as our entrance medical. Another example is physical fitness. We recognize that service members in the different branches of military have regular fitness assessments. We would like to offer reciprocity for our physical fitness. We have 2 of those in our hiring process. In addition, the EQIP process and the background investigation process, to the extent that we can leverage an already existing background investigation, we will. So I think those are groundbreaking approaches that we're trying to implement. The goal right now is to start that reciprocity arrangement with DoD in the month of May. Our overarching goal for the time to hire to onboard through this facilitated process service members and veterans into frontline occupations is within a 90-day window. That's our goal. It will probably take us a little time to walk through that as we implement a new process, but the goal is to get to a 90-day time period.
Wait, go ahead.
With respect to the polygraph requirements and the TS-SCI, we do offer reciprocity for some types of polygraphs. That's a policy that we've put in place, and it's been in place for some time. So if we have a transitioning service member with a polygraph within the last 3 years, we will look to offer reciprocity. Above and beyond that, we're exploring some concepts. Again, pre-decisional does not necessarily represent an agency position, but we are looking at, does it make sense to maybe have a risk management framework in place to assess levels of suitability depending on your background experience, different levels of clearance that you held in former positions, maybe some different types of exceptions in that regard. That's something that we're exploring right now as an agency. We have not even really put pen to paper, and that's pre-decisional. But I want to leave you with the thought that we're leaving no stone unturned and we're exploring all options.
All right, thank you. Just to clarify, though, when it comes to someone who's been through like an SSBI, are you accepting that background investigation, or are you doing an entirely separate background investigation? Are those some of the things you're going to consider to accept as well?
Yes, Chairwoman, that's what we're considering.
Okay, great, thank you. I would encourage you, it sounds like these hiring hubs are helping to streamline, but if you were to have those hiring hubs located in places that have military facilities, you could speed up everything even tighter. So I do know we're having a jobs fair in Southern Arizona that I'm hosting. I would love to coordinate with you to possibly have a hiring hub be a part of that. We've got 2 large military installations there and a lot of veterans, just so we can, and I've heard from other members too, that have large military presence in their communities to help sort of streamline that, to put those 2 together.
Thank you, Chairwoman. We welcome the opportunity to collaborate on the recruiting side. And for your awareness, we will have a hiring hub in Tucson in April.
Okay,
and
fantastic.
the degree to which we can collaborate on recruiting, that would be wonderful. We've also had hiring hubs at Fort Bliss, Bragg, Campbell, Fort Hood, Camp Lejeune, and Joint Base Lewis McChord.
Great, thank you. Next, I want to talk about the polygraph itself. We have heard several anecdotal horror stories of decorated combat veterans who for some reason were unable to pass this polygraph, coupled with some bizarre sounding behavior on the behalf of the polygraph examiners. Can you outline how closely CBP is monitoring the polygraph exam and the individuals who administer the test?
Absolutely. As you know, Chairwoman, CBP is required to conduct a polygraph per the Anti-Border Corruption Act of 2010. And I guess the parting thought that I want to share with you is that our program follows the same standards as any other law enforcement polygraph program. We are certified by the National Center for Credibility Assessment. We undergo that certification every other year. Our last assessment was done last January. So I share that with you because the training and the program gets certified on a regular basis. With respect to how we monitor the activity, we have a quality assurance program within CBP that actively monitors on a daily basis the activity of the individual polygraph examiners, and they will intervene if they believe that an examiner is trending in an area that is beyond established thresholds. And in addition to that, they take a look at audios. Every polygraph exam has an audio recording, so we look at the audio tapes, and sometimes we will pull that polygraph examiner off the line if we feel that more remediation or maybe training is needed, particularly when we're onboarding new polygraph examiners. There's that mentoring component that we have. And so in terms of our degree of rigor, I would say that it's fairly sound. I would also say that we take very seriously any complaint that we have with respect to the administration of that exam or any constituent concerns that maybe some of your constituents might have. There is a method called the Privacy Act waiver that constituents can complete, and we would be happy to share the findings of a polygraph exam, the nature of any admissions that are uncovered in that exam, if someone elects to complete a Privacy Act waiver.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Reardon, I know you represent those that have made it through the process, but are probably then going through periodic screening while they're in service. Have you heard any concerns related to the polygraph from your members?
Thank you, Chairwoman. More of what I've heard is really related to family members and friends of our members who have, in some recent times, gone through the polygraph process. And I've heard some of the same kinds of horror stories that I suspect you are probably referring to. The kinds of questions that are asked go beyond, really, at least from what I've heard. Clearly, I wasn't there, but the stories I've heard clearly go beyond what I think is probably acceptable to be asking someone. And so I've raised this, actually, in the past with CBP because I think this really should be looked at very carefully to find out where the problem is. I mean, where we have it taking, I think the numbers that you provided early on were 100 to 150 applicants in order to get one CBP officer on board. I mean, there's something wrong in the process. And I suspect that at least some of that is related to polygraphs, and I think that should be looked at very carefully.
Thank you. And just to reiterate from my opening statement, we all agree we got to make sure we vet individuals. We've got to make sure that we've got accountability, and those that are serving in these important positions are above board. We've just got to make sure that we're not wrongfully, filtering out, especially our combat veterans in the process through false positives or however you want to categorize that. Okay, the chairman will now recognize other members of the subcommittee for questions they may wish to ask to the witnesses. In accordance with our committee rules and practice, I recognize members who are present at the start of the hearing by seniority in the subcommittee. Those coming in later will be recognized in order. The chair now recognizes Mr. Higgins, the acting ranking member.
Thank you very much. Congress has two responsibilities here. One is budgetary and the other is oversight. So in the omnibus bill of 2014, based on concerns that were brought to Congress, Congress responded by providing funding for 2,000 additional agents to try to address the problems, the staffing shortages at the ports of entry. Also in that legislation was a mandate that Customs and Border Protection provide a staffing model to show how that personnel was going to be distributed along both the southern and northern border. That has not been available yet, so it's very hard for Congress to to exercise, to fulfill its oversight responsibility. So the only thing that we really have to go on is anecdotal evidence that the staffing shortages still exist along both borders, resulting in inefficiencies and employees who are dissatisfied. I'm reading in Mr. Reardon's testimony that ongoing staff shortages directly contribute to CBP's perennial ranking at the very bottom of the Partnership for Public Services Best Places to Work survey. 314 out of 320 agency subcomponents on the latest survey. That's a problem. That's a problem in terms of morale, and just the importance of that relative to recruitment of officers. Secondly, there's an avoidance factor when, particularly along the northern border, my experience with the Peace Bridge in Buffalo is the busiest northern border crossing for passenger vehicles. If there is a sense that there are delays there because of lack of infrastructure, because of poor staffing strategies, people adjust their economic behavior to avoid the cross-border movement. And it hurts economies like Buffalo and Western New York who rely on an efficient, reliable, predictable movement into and out of Southern Ontario, which is a population center of 12 million people. Very, very important to the life quality and economic viability of places like Western New York. So I guess for everybody on the panel, we just need to do a much better job here because, security is obviously a primary issue, but that important balance of economic activity and promoting it as efficiently as possible is important too. So when Congress takes an action 2 years ago to address the needs, the personnel needs of both the southern and northern borders, and yet, we have not fulfilled that obligation, and we have no information from Customs and Border Protection about the staffing model, what are we to go on other than the anecdotal evidence? Poor morale, borders that just continue to be congested. We're not fulfilling our responsibility. So I throw that to the panel generally. Mr. Reardon, you want to take that?
Thank you, Congressman. I think that you're absolutely right. I mean, from my perspective, the staffing shortage is certainly a large part of the problem when you start looking at the morale. We've got, and in fact, last week I was with more than 350 of our leaders from around the country, CBP leaders from around the country. And I had the opportunity then and certainly at other times to speak with them about the morale at CBP. And, where you have individuals, for example, if we take San Ysidro, the San Ysidro crossing, you have people who are working 12 to 15-hour days, day after day, week after week after week. After a while, it begins to wear on people. People are beaten up. They're tired. We were noticed by CBP, a while back that they were going to not only have TDYs up to 90 days, but they noticed us that they could go as up to 180 days. Well, even when you look at taking someone from their family, from far away, and moving them for 90 days where they potentially have small children, they've certainly got lives where they are, that kind of thing begins to really wear on a human being. I guess I would also add kind of to the small list I'm giving you the fact that, You know, when you talk to CBP employees, I think probably at the core for them is that they don't feel valued. And so I believe that, you know, there needs to be some serious work, and you know, we've already talked about the FEV scores, the Federal Employee Viewpoint scores. They are routinely, year after year, very low. And, you know, at some point, something's got to be done to actually address those issues. And certainly, I think staffing is a large component of that.
Anybody else?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Higgins. The chair now recognizes Mr. Hurd from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for holding this hearing and all that you have done to make sure that we're focused on the border. And I'd like to start off, like with most of my colleagues, with condolences for the family of Jose Barraza. I know it's hard to lose a colleague, and I can only imagine what his wife and 2 sons are going through, so please pass our condolences along. And I want to thank Mr. Sheehan and Mr. Gelber for your work helping us with trying to extend the 559 program. Hopefully, we'll see that over the finish line soon. And Commissioner Wagner, it's always a pleasure to see you. My first question is actually to Ms. Jocasta. And we talked about the polygraph a little bit, and there are a number, the number of folks that are not making it through that process seem incredibly high. And my question is, the number of folks that fail the poly during the interview process, is it comparable to other agencies that do polygraph for hiring?
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. We're in the process now of conducting a benchmarking study. We have reached out to the National Center for Credibility Assessment to try to ascertain where we stand vis-a-vis other organizations that are conducting the same polygraph. The one word of caution that I would mention is that our applicant pool is vastly different than many other applicant pools from other federal law enforcement organizations. And so we're trying to be careful in making sure that we're measuring apples to apples.
I completely understand that. As being someone who's gone through multiple polygraphs, I appreciate this issue. How long is that going to take?
I'll be happy to take that back for the record.
Copy. The next question, and maybe we'll stay with you, ma'am. Hardship pay. That was something that was, listen, being on the border multiple times a month, I recognize the hardships, the difficulties that the men and women within all of DHS have to go through. And hardship pay has changed over the years. And, you know, it's something where, because there are some places that are harder than others. Let's be honest about that. And the difficulty sometimes in finding folks to go to those really hard places, remotes, trying to encourage them to do this. What is on the horizon when it comes to hardship pay and using that as a way to help retain or reduce attrition?
Certainly, and I recognize that this is a conversation that is ensuing with a number of different folks on the Hill. What I would share with you is that we already employ a couple of different elements as a way to augment the basic rate of pay. One is the use of special salary rates, and we use special salary rates right now in Porter, North Dakota for the ag specialists. We're looking at pursuing something for CBP officers and Border Patrol agents as well. But that, again, is something that we're working with the operational offices on. And also special salary rates for our air interdiction agents at select locations across the country. We're also using incentives.
And when do we think those studies will be completed, or when there will be a plan?
It is my understanding that, for example, the CBP air interdiction agent special salary rate is in existence today. The use of recruitment incentives is also in existence today, and that is to help us specifically fill positions in hard or remote locations. And we use data, attrition data, and applicant data to help us guide where we want to offer those incentives. In fact, year-to-date in FY16, we've offered 75 different incentives. In the state of Arizona alone, there's 330 folks pending incentives. So with respect to the hardship pay, I would say that we are looking at a broader strategy of special salary rates across the board. But
And again, when do we think that that review is going to be? And I have 30 seconds. I want to ask 2 more questions. So,
that review is underway, so I'll get that for the record.
yeah, I'd like to know a time when it's going to be completed. And who is engaged in conversations with local merchants, businesses, when, you know, we can protect our border and facilitate the movement of goods and services at the same time. There's groups like the Border Trade Alliance that are looking at understanding what the volume is going to be in the future in order to ensure the staffing levels are there at the ports of entry. Who is responsible for that engagement within your organization?
I'll defer that question to my colleague, Mr. Wagner.
Mr. Wagner.
Good morning. So, I mean, that's a conversation we have at the local level with our local managers and then at the national level with us. And, you know, we work closely with all the, you know, alliances and representative groups. In our workload staffing model, we factor in about a 3% workload increase across the board. A conservative figure, but it does account for across-the-board growth. If there's new and special things, new facilities, new activity that we're certain, we can also factor those into the model, too. So it's a combination of both.
Good copy. And if Madam Chairwoman would indulge me with one question to you, Mr. Wagner. Internal checkpoints. There are a number in Texas. How is the staffing decided at those? Do we have studies been done at peak times? Because one of the things that I frequently hear from folks is on Friday afternoon and Sunday mornings, the internal checkpoint, it takes longer to get through that than if you were trying to cross the border. And I'm interested in looking at, you know, are there times when we can ensure we have, you know, all hands on deck in order to facilitate that travel?
We'll have to get back to you on that. I mean, the Office of Border Patrol handles the interior checkpoints. I mean, we do a lot of work with them from the ports of entry, linking the technology and communicating back and forth. But let me get back to you with a better answer on how they determine the staffing for those.
Good copy. And I yield back the time I do not have.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Torres from California.
Thank you. I want to make sure that our panel truly gets a good picture of how concerned we are about the staffing issues that you're facing. You can have a recruitment center across every state, across every city, across every military branch, and we will only be wasting money if we're not able to retain people because of the work environment that you are providing for them. I've heard directly from CBP employees that have been giving absolutely no notice and been sent from LAX to our southern border. I understand, for 17 and a half years, I have worked in a paramilitary organization. I understand that it is a lifestyle, that weekends, forced overtime, and holiday work and nights is part of the job. That's why it is a lifestyle and not just a job. But it is unacceptable when we are asking single moms, single dads, to abandon their children without any notice for 3 months. That is unacceptable. Certainly, you would not want to do that or want to have that job. So if we're not able to staff people because we are we're overwhelming them on background checks, on other types of testing that are not applicable to the job, I think that this is time for a serious revision of this hiring process. And I hope that today, when you leave this hearing, you don't just turn the page and go on about your bureaucratic, way of doing business, and that you actually take a serious look at how you are impacting families and my constituents, not just the employees, but also how that is impacting our airports. I have the Ontario International Airport in my district. Currently, this is a small airport. Currently, they have 16 arriving and 16 departing international passenger flights per week on 2 carriers, but CBP officers are deployed to Ontario as an as-needed basis and not stationed there. How is the staffing shortage affecting smaller airports, and how can we work together to correct this problem? I remember several years ago when a carrier had to they had to do a layover at Ontario Airport, and the passengers waited 16 hours because they were waiting for CBP personnel to come from LAX. That is unacceptable. That is not the business model that we want to see. Can you tell me how this is impacting our smaller airports, your lack of ability to hire people?
Sure, and I agree with you on both points. If I could address the temporary duty situation first in San Diego and the Port of San Ysidro. We have deployed 197 employees to date, and the procedures we use to do that, something we've negotiated with the National Treasury Employees Union, is we take volunteers first. And out of the 197, 194 of them have been voluntary assignments. There were 3 employees from the Chicago field office that were involuntary assigned to that. Now, as we go to the next round, and as we hit summer, I imagine that number will increase, but these are the negotiated provisions by which we make those assignments. Now, out of the people that are there, 27 of them have asked to extend and go into the second round, and we've had a handful of employees want to transfer there permanently. I did that. I went from New York City down to Laredo, Texas on a TDY.
Well, I have limited
in
time,
1993,
sir.
and I ended up staying. Now,
Excuse me, I have limited
Okay.
time here, and what I'm telling you is that the employees that I heard from are telling me that you have ran out of volunteers. So when you run out of volunteers, you are forcing people to either continue their deployment there, where you have transferred them, or you're deploying new bodies. So I'd like to go on to continue to ask you about specifically about how this is impacting my airport in my community. As part of the new strategic business plan for Ontario, expanding airline service is a top priority. As part of this initiative, the Ontario International Airport Authority has identified opportunities for new and increased services to Mexico, Central America, Asia, and the Pacific Rim, as well as Western Canada. However, to capture those opportunities, Ontario needs a commitment for more on-site CBP personnel. How is that going to happen under this environment that you have created?
It's very difficult for us to do that. We have service requests from multiple small to mid-size and the large airports for increased service. We have John Wayne, we have Melbourne, we have Reno, we have Pittsburgh, we have San Diego. All these airports have been in to ask us for increased service, and including Ontario. So we do our best to balance. The good part about Ontario is we have a large pool to draw from LAX to provide that. There's other options that they have available with the reimbursable services agreement. They can go with the user fee status, and there's other opportunities for them to be able to provide some of those costs that fit into their business model. There's also technology that they can choose to deploy. They can purchase automated passport control kiosks. They can help us do our job more efficiently, too. So it's continued discussions with them on how best to provide that service.
I'm out of time. I yield back the rest.
Ms. Higgins, did you want to ask unanimous?
Yeah, I ask unanimous consent for the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne, to sit and question the witnesses at today's hearing.
Without objection, Mr. Payne is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the ranking member, I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. I am the member of Congress that has the Port of Newark and Newark National Liberty Airport in my district. Customs and Border Protection agricultural specialists at Newark Airport clear up to 20,000 passengers every day. At the Port of Newark, one of the busiest ports on the East Coast, specialists inspect imported food items, marble, slabs, tiles, and wood packing material, all of which can carry insects and other pests that can harm the domestic agriculture. So I have a question for the entire panel. We all know there's a severe shortage of agricultural specialists at Newark's Port of Entry, in the neighborhood of around 30. How does CBP propose to fund the hiring of 631 additional CPB agricultural specialists as called for in your agency's own agricultural RAM?
So I believe in the, so we have the agriculture resource allocation model. It's about 723 employees when you factor in supervisors into that number. I believe in our 17 budget, and I'll have to verify the number, 100 or so of those positions would be provided for. Now, with the new agriculture user fees that went into effect, we're looking at the collections that are coming in and putting together the strategy on how to hire the balance to reach that number.
So at this point, you say you have the resources to get 100?
I believe we put into the 17 budget proposal, it's 100 and something agriculture specialists that would be proposed to be funded. But I'll get you that exact number.
Okay, but am I off base with the 631 that are needed?
Right, there's still a large gap that would remain.
And so there is, what is the plan moving forward in order to fill that gap?
So as we look at the new agriculture user fees that we collect, we would look to use those to support additional positions. So we're looking at, the new fee schedule just went into place earlier this year. So looking at the increase in collections in those different fees and what funds might be available then to fund additional positions.
What factors are considered when determining staffing levels for particular ports of entry, and how do they vary by type of port of entry? And what trends are you noticing for northern or coastal ports of entry compared to those on the southwest border?
So our workload staffing model, what we do is actually take all of the different tasks an officer or agriculture specialist does each day, the time involved it takes to do each one of those tasks, and we multiply it by how many times it's typically done at that particular port of entry, and we come up with the amount of work hours needed to run that port. Divide that by the available work hours of an employee, and we come up with the staffing number. And that's tailored to each specific port of entry on a basis of an assessment of this very specific workload that goes there. And we use that then as the guide to judge what is the right amount of staff to put at each port of entry, and then adjust that seasonally as we see the traffic and workload conditions dictate. On your other question, what we're seeing is an increase in travel and trade. Commercial air travel at the commercial airports was up 5-point-something% last year. It's tracking at 7.8% growth this fiscal year. Land border traffic, we've seen a small decrease on the northern border that could tie into the Canadian dollar and less Canadian visitors coming in, but we've seen a small decrease. We have seen somewhat of a recovery on the southwest border, though, with the passenger vehicle and the pedestrian traffic increasing slightly, 1 to 2% last year into this year.
Okay. And as I wrap up, how does CPB assess risk and prioritize infrastructure improvements across air, land, and seaports to ensure that the investments that go into the ports, the investment goes into the ports with the greatest needs?
So we've got a strategic resource assessment process that we use particularly for the land ports of entry. Each of the environments, land, sea, air, has a slightly different approach. They have different authorities and different ownership models to them. But for the land ports of entry, we use the strategic resource assessment process. For the airports, that is generally free space that is provided by the airports to CBP. So in those cases, we're working with the local airport authorities on their plans for modernization of those ports. And we provide to them a series of requirements that we look to have included in our inspectional facilities at the airports. And the same is true with the seaports.
Well, thank you, and I'd like to thank the chair for indulging me and the ranking member allowing me to come over and ask a few questions. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to do another round here. I want to transition to the ports of entry, especially with a focus on the land ports of entry and the dire need to upgrade, expand, and modernize them. As many of my colleagues have mentioned, the border provides challenges for security, but also provides opportunity for commerce, which is tied to our economy, growth of jobs, and so we've got to figure out how to be able to let the good stuff in and keep the bad stuff out. And the infrastructure is a main facilitator or barrier to that, and we see that in my community, and many of us have talked about that already. Many members, including myself, are concerned about the prioritization process. It doesn't seem totally transparent to us or understandable. I mean, I hear about a capital investment plan. I hear about a strategic resource assessment process. And Mr. Gerber, you talk about a border master planning process. This is like this is a bureaucracy headache. It doesn't seem very obvious what the process is to us, what the prioritization and the criteria are. We want to make sure that it reflects common sense criteria, because how you measure and rank order things obviously can determine the outcome, whatever criteria that you're using. The obvious things of wait times and the amount of traffic that's going through and increasing seem to be obvious, but as we've mentioned here already, the opportunity cost of what's not coming through, how people are changing their behavior, businesses are not growing. We hear about this all the time in our community. Businesses that want to expand, but because they know they're bottlenecked related to coming through the Douglas Port of Entry, they're not going to be able to expand. People that are choosing not to come over and spend money or shop because the time is money, and so how do you measure opportunity cost? How do you measure whether you have a partner on the Mexican side as well related to the government or landowners? Talk me through this process, and what can we do to make it more transparent and understandable for us?
I'll start with that and then throw it to Mr. Gelber. So again, the different environments, and you focused specifically, I think, in the land ports of entry, so that's where I'll focus the assessment. Starts with the strategic resource assessment. So what that is CBP personnel going to the ports of entry, literally going through in a check sheet type fashion and assessing the infrastructure as it exists. Walking around, actually looking at the facility, how the traffic flows through the facility, looking at issues like the building systems. Is the facility basically working or not working? Also interviewing the staff to find out what's going on with that facility. And that gives us basically the foundation for the existing facilities, what's going on there. We do work in the regional planning, so we do take into account, try and factor in, is there projected workload growth at that location? You try and factor in, do the Mexicans or the Canadians have a project that would need to work with you on that? What are the local highway and transportation plans? So we start with that basic resource assessment, then factor in what else is going on in the environment.
Do you include local stakeholders in that, or just the staff?
Local stakeholders. So we're trying to get the various locations, we're trying to plug into the regional planning, which usually is going to involve the local community in the Department of Transportation as a part of that conversation.
And how often do you do this? Once a year when you update your 5-year plan, or?
So I would say a lot of the conversation is ongoing. The strategic resource assessments and actually going out and doing that kind of physical inspection only happens every few years.
Okay.
The actual working with GSA on how much, what the top priorities would be is an ongoing basis, but results in an annual plan.
Do you know the last time that you did that at the Douglas Port of Entry?
Last year.
Okay.
We actually did the walk around.
2015. Okay, great. As you know, the Douglas Port of Entry has needed modernization for many years. From our perspective, as tremendous shortfalls and limitations to it.
Yep.
We have struggled to find the financing. Where is the Douglas Port of Entry on the prioritization list? And could you please provide the committee with the most recent capital investment plan? And will you guys please share future iterations of the plan with this committee, given the significant interest of our members? We'd prefer not to try and extract it from you, but actually deliver it to us in a timely manner.
Sure. So we will provide the list. The authorization bill that Congress recently passed actually requires us to provide that to you, and so of course we will do that.
So when are we going to get it?
So I think that, I forget what the exact time frame was after enactment. I think it was about 3 months after enactment, so it would be later this spring or summer is when we owe it to you, and that's when we'll deliver it.
Okay, I mean, other committees have it already, so we're just wondering, when are you going to deliver it to this committee?
So the other, so that would be a different report. That would be
Okay.
the 5-year, or the annual 5-year plan.
Okay.
And again, we can work with the other committees to make sure there's no objection on their part to us sharing that information with this committee as well.
Okay, and can you share where Douglas is on your prioritization plan and how you came to that conclusion?
Sure. So Douglas will be in the upcoming plan. We recognize it as one of the top infrastructure needs that we have. As you have mentioned, the facility is very inadequate. It's old. It fails on multiple counts to be the kind of facility that we want to provide. And in the upcoming 5-year plan, I expect Douglas will be a part of one of the projects that we seek funding for. It's one of our higher priorities.
Upcoming meaning the one that you've produced already and delivered to the other committees?
So
other
the
committee?
2016 plan has not yet come up to the committees, and
Okay.
so that's working its way through that black hole that you referred to earlier, and Douglas is on that list.
Okay, we look forward to following up with you. And we don't have time in this just 5 minutes, but I really look forward to working with both GSA and CBP to better understand the criteria that you're using so that we can, feel more confident that it's a transparent process. Again, we hear anecdotes that sometimes if, local governments are helpful or not helpful, there's some subjective elements there that move projects up or down the list. We just want to understand what's objective, what's subjective, so that, we can have confidence in the prioritization process. I know I'm way over my time again, but I have lots more questions, but I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Higgins for a little while.
Thank you very much. Well, I see that the infrastructure guy isn't here, and infrastructure is obviously a very important piece to all this. And I'm amazed when I read this story about the new international bridge being constructed between Detroit, Michigan, and Windsor, Ontario, and the fact that the entire project is being financed by the Canadian government. A 6-lane bridge, and the Canadian government is also financing the entire cost of the American plaza. Total project cost is $2.3 billion. Can you explain to me, can anybody explain to me how this happens, and why is there seemingly, at least in this project, and presumably, generally, a lack of United States government commitment to building these critical border crossings? Again, the profoundly, all of the, the information coming from the state of Michigan, from the city of Detroit, is that how this international bridge crossing will profoundly influence favorably the economic prospects of the state of Michigan and the city of Detroit. And yet, from what I'm reading, there doesn't seem to be any U.S. financial commitment to the building of this critical international border.
So I would start with the funding for that project is going to come from the tolls that are collected. And so at a lot of the privately owned infrastructure, there's tolls, and so there's a revenue stream. And I think the position of the U.S. government was that that revenue stream could pay for the plaza. In terms of commitment, though, the U.S. government's going to put in substantial commitment to this project because we will be staffing and operating that facility.
You're staffing and operating a facility anyhow. I'm not talking about the staffing right now. I'm just talking about the infrastructure commitment to these kinds of projects. And I do understand that the money will be recouped from the recurring revenue that exists from tolls. But this project has been delayed substantially because of lack of interest, lack of will on the part of the U.S. government to contribute. I mean, Canada is a country of 30 million people. The United States is a country of 323 million people. The economy of our nation is $19 trillion. Our budget is $4 trillion a year. Yet there's no infrastructure investment into this bridge that, to me, speaks to, again, a larger problem relative to ports of entry throughout the entire northern border.
So, I would agree with you on the fact that we do have a challenge on getting the resources necessary to rebuild a lot of the ports of entry on the northern border. I think we, from a CBP perspective, recognize that the privately owned facilities as well as the publicly owned facilities need substantial infrastructure investment where we can find a private entity or a local bridge authority that will work with us to make that
But don't
investment.
you think it speaks to a larger problem when the Canadian government is financing not only the full cost of the bridge span between Windsor, Ontario, and Detroit, Michigan, but they are also financing the full cost and the build-out of the American Plaza?
I think it does speak to the challenges that we face in funding the infrastructure. We've got, as I think was alluded to in the chairwoman's opening statement, a $5 billion need in terms of recapitalization. So we do face a significant challenge.
All right, so CBP has projected that $6 billion over the next 10 years would be needed to modernize the existing inventory of land ports of entry to recent security and facilitation demands. How much of this money is budgeted? We do a transportation bill that is typically a bill that's a 5-year authorization. How much of this $6 billion is funded in that bill, or does it come from someplace else? And if it comes from someplace else, where does it come from?
So most of it, of that figure, most of it would need to come from the Federal Buildings Fund because most of those ports of entry, particularly the larger ones, are GSA-owned facilities.
Okay, let me just, I'll finish up here because I'm over. But when we talk about the importance of cross-border movement in terms of national security and in terms of economic benefit, at the very least, to those communities that are specifically affected by those land ports of entry, we are falling significantly behind. This is not a challenge. This is a crisis. And again, I can tell you that, look at behavioral economics. When we're confident, we move. When we're not, we don't. And here's what I know the situation in terms of behavioral economics at the Peace Bridge. And I suspect that this is pervasive throughout other congested land ports of entry, that people have adjusted their economic movement, their behavior, to do what they refer to as avoidance. They avoid a situation that they're not certain of because there's no reliability, there's no predictability. The only way that you build in reliability and predictability is to build in capacity. The Peace Bridge in Buffalo was built 89 years ago. It's the busiest northern border crossing between the United States and Canada. And guess what? It's 3 lanes. The population of southern Ontario since that time has increased by 400%. So 50% of the time, you're down to 1 lane because they use an alternating lane system. I know anecdotally, from people who I know and my experience myself, is you don't go near the Peace Bridge unless you are absolutely, you have no other choice. That's the wrong message to be sending, particularly when you look, the relationship at the southern border is different. I understand that. But the relationship at the northern border is very different as well. And for the border communities that depend on predictable, reliable access into and out of Southern Ontario, again, a population center of 12 million people projected to grow another 3 million over the next decade. And you have that avoidance. We are really hurting ourselves economically, and we're compromising our national security.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. I do want to follow up on the source of funding, because right now, these very important ports of entry, land ports of entry, are included into the federal building fund. So we're prioritizing between something that is so important for our security and our commerce with, office buildings for some bureaucracy for people to come to work, which is, it's also important that people have a place to come to work. But to me, shouldn't be in the same category. Should we be somehow moving ports of entry into a different funding category so it's not mixed in with this federal building fund and it's more a part of our infrastructure? Mr. Gelber, do you have any comments on that?
From GSA's perspective, we would prefer to keep the CBP inventory as part of the larger government real property inventory so that we can allocate these dollars in the best way that addresses the entire executive branch's needs. On an annual basis, we allocate approximately $150 million of funding for CBP projects. This fiscal year, we're working on the Alexandria Bay crossing in New York, as well as the Columbus crossing in New Mexico. We have a request for the Calexico crossing in California, and then fiscal year 18, our request will be for the Alexandria Bay crossing in New York. In the out years of our 5-year plan, we've set aside, in effect, $150 million for funding for CBP's projects once we receive their 5-year plan. So while it is a difficult issue to balance the needs of a variety of federal agencies, we still believe it's the best way to approach the government's real property inventory.
Mr. Sheed, do you have a similar opinion or something different?
Sorry. I would just appreciate as much money out of the Federal Buildings Fund as CBP can get to modernize its infrastructure.
Okay, great. I also want to ask, often you are entered into long-term leases for some of these structures. One of the attempts, just as an example, that Douglas used to try and fund them was through a bond. The community was literally going to mortgage its future for the land and the investment, and then was asking to have it be leased back. But it was denied because it wasn't under the current public-private partnership, which is, I get that, but is there not a potential model to also lease back from local communities that are willing to do bonds to invest in this infrastructure because they see the benefit? What new authorities would you need? Is that something you'd be willing to entertain if we gave you those authorities?
That would be something GSA would be interested in discussing with the committee. Currently, what I'll refer to as the government accounting rules state that for a lease of the nature that you're referencing requires to be accounted for all in the first year of the lease. So it's a significant hit, if you will, on the federal budget for that 1 year, even though the payments will occur over a 20 or 30-year payment period.
But you still have long-term leases with other entities, right?
We do, and some of those leases are treated as what I refer to as operating leases, and some other leases incur the budgetary scoring rules that would make it a little more difficult to enter into a lease in the manner in which you're speaking.
Mr. Sheen?
Yeah, I would add to that. Part of the public-private partnership dialogue that we want to have, and part of, I think, the advantage of that kind of a program is it does let the local community approach us with ideas and commitments that they'd be willing to make. I think as we're only going through this, this is the second round that we're going through. So I think both us and the local communities are still in a bit of a learning curve as to sort of what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what's legally permissible, what's not. I think as we continue to work through that, we might have some further ideas about future changes to language or authorities that would be useful. It also helps us to educate the local communities about how they might structure a project that when they do bring it to us, it's something that we would be able to accept.
Okay, great. I just want to close with a couple final questions on Manning, if you don't mind, related to the Manning. Mr. Reardon, I heard thanks for your testimony and the perspectives of the workforce and the low morale. I mean, I think just from my military experience, oftentimes low morale comes from a variety of different root causes. Sometimes it is hardship circumstances. Sometimes it's leadership culture. There's a variety of different things. And I think of some of the situations you're talking about, but we have men and women in uniform in our military that are often told on very short notice to deploy for a year over and over again away from their families. They make it work, and morale is often very high in very arduous circumstances because we're part of something greater than ourselves. So I don't believe those that are your workforce are just cash focused. My hope would be that that's not true. That there's hopefully a deeper commitment to service and to making a difference, being a part of something greater than themselves. And there's maybe a variety of other issues that are associated with this that hopefully it's not just, I want more cash to be able to, do this particular role. I think these things sometimes can be complex cultural issues. But I just want to clarify that, do you believe there's a cultural issue, a leadership issue, or is this just a monetary issue for the workforce?
Chairwoman, thank you for the question. No, I absolutely do not for one moment believe that it is a monetary issue alone. I think that rather there are a wide variety of issues at play here. I do think that there is a leadership issue. I think that oftentimes our frontline employees are not they're not involved in decisions that are made. They're not asked their opinions on decisions that are made, and I think that's a problem. I think it's a problem also that when our members believe that they do really outstanding work, and they do outstanding work, and let me just for the record say that our CBP employees, they without question do this work and are proud to do this work and proud to do it for this country. There is no question about that. Many of them are former military. And so I want to underscore how critically important the work is that they do and how committed they are to doing the work. But I think, I mentioned in my earlier comments about employees feeling valued. And the whole issue, certainly in the military, related to esprit de corps, those kinds of things, as you well know, are important. And so if there is a disconnect between the leadership and the frontline employees, you have a problem. And oftentimes that goes directly to the issue of trust. And so, you asked if there are other issues at play here, and I would say absolutely there are. For example, we have someone mentioned, I think Mr. Wagner mentioned earlier, the contract certainly that exists between CBP and NTEU. We run into situations where certainly in our view the contract is not adhered to. And those kinds of things, when that happens repeatedly, when the contract isn't followed, when decisions are made by arbitrators and so on and so forth, and then CBP continues to push off reacting to the arbitrator's decision, for example, forever. I mean, on and on and on and on. There is a message that is sent to frontline employees that we don't matter, that we're not valued. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly a cultural issue here.
Mr. Wagner, I want to give you a chance to respond.
Great, thank you. And I agree with Mr. Reardon. Our employees are motivated by the mission. They're 100% behind it and dedicated to it and support it. It's a great mission to get behind. It's very difficult jobs that they have. It's a very demanding job. There's a lot of responsibility on the decisions they make day in and day out. They work in very difficult conditions. They work very difficult hours and places, dangerous places. So these things do compound themselves, and when you are short on resources and traffic is increasing, and like any large organization, we struggle with communication efforts. It does compound itself, and you see these things manifest themselves in things like the scores in the FEV survey. But they're an incredibly hardworking group of men and women. The sacrifices that they do make, I don't think we always appropriately recognize. Someone has to work weekends, someone has to work holidays, somebody works Thanksgiving Day and Christmas Day, and the sacrifices they make to miss graduations, birthday parties, anniversaries, and a lot of family time and personal commitments. Someone has to be there. The border has to be open. We just can't close on a holiday and say we'll be back tomorrow. We don't have that option, so someone has to work. We negotiate provisions with the bargaining unit, with NTU, on how to fairly select people to work those assignments. Somebody's got to work overtime on Christmas Day. It happens. Nobody wants to volunteer. But we have a system that the low earner on a list, and it's a base of earnings, gets stuck with the longest job in some sense of fairness and equity, and we try to balance that. It's tough to explain that to the person who's getting forced to work, the person that involuntarily gets sent TDY to San Ysidro, who say, we have 23,000 CBP officers. Why do I have to go? Can't find anyone else out of the whole country. Sometimes it's difficult to explain that. We do struggle with that communication. But I agree 100%. Our employees are extremely hardworking and are motivated, very successful at what they do in a lot of very, very challenging circumstances.
Great, thanks. Please indulge my time here. Now that I've got you all here, I do have a few more follow-up questions, just again related to the manning and personnel. One is the mandatory age 57 retirement, which backs up to a 37 is the highest age, although that can be waived, and I understand is waived for veterans. For me, I think this is an artificial number. I mean, this is sort of ageism in some regard, that you're looking at people, based on just their age versus their experience. I think about some of the veterans coming out of the military. If you're an officer, you're retiring at the earliest at 42, 43. And I know there's exceptions to every rule, but is this a barrier as you're trying to fill these qualified positions? It just seems to me that you should look at people as individuals and not these blanket age rules. And, is there something that we can do to help with that based on the current mandatory 57 retirement? Also, it was noteworthy to me. I mean, we're talking about these thousands and thousands of people that you're hiring, or that you're applying, that is coming down to, just trying to fill these positions. I think in your testimony it said 40% of the applicants don't even show up for their interview or their next stage in the application, which is troubling to me. So we obviously, all your efforts are trying to find the right people to get into step one, so you're not wasting a lot of time casting a huge net. So, I mean, what else can we do to assist you in that? Are there other things that we need to help fast track, or is this just all for you to internally address? So those two quick questions.
Thank you, Congressman. I think you will be pleased to know that the Commissioner has recently raised the entry age for law enforcement occupations from 37 to 40, and also from the mandatory retirement age from 57 to 60. He has the authority to do that for new employees in frontline occupations. He will do that for a 3-year period.
Okay.
So I think that's very, very good news and specifically addresses your concern.
For a veteran, can that be higher than that? Because again, the earliest an officer can retire is usually at 42 from the military.
I will take that back and research that for you.
Okay.
With respect to the entrance exam, what we have found is that we lose 50% of our applicant pool at the entrance exam, and we want to find out why is that happening. We implemented a survey, thousands of people responded. We're in the process of assessing what the results of that survey indicate. Early analysis tells us a couple of things. First is, upon further reflection, the applicant determines, maybe I don't really want to pursue that law enforcement career. We have an 11-step process. It's fairly rigorous, intentionally so. Second is polygraph. It acts as somewhat as a deterrent. When they get scheduled for their entrance exam and they see all the other requirements, and then they finally realize that the polygraph is one of those requirements, they say thank you, but no thank you. So certainly, as we discussed earlier this morning, we're certainly willing to have a dialogue with you and other members of Congress in that regard, and any flexibilities we may want to employ going forward. Okay. With respect to the recruitment, I think this is one of the #1 areas where we need to focus our efforts. We have used data, 5 years worth of data, to specifically identify areas in the country where we have been successful previously in recruiting officers and agents into frontline positions. That data has been provided to every field office in every sector in the country. That's 40 different locations. And each sector chief and each director of field operations has specific goals and objectives for targeting in those local areas based on what the data tells us. So we are hopeful that targeted recruiting strategy will bear some positive news for us. I will share with you that early indications are somewhat positive. In terms of our qualification rates in the hiring process, are starting to see a little bit of an uptick for the good. I think it's too early to tell whether or not that targeted effort is really producing what we want, but we're cautiously watching and we're cautiously optimistic.
Can you clarify that the 161 days or so that it's now taking, is that just for where we have hiring hubs, or is that the average for all hires?
That is a pilot that we implemented for hiring hubs. Our goal by the end of this fiscal year, however, is to take a look at the entire applicant pool and get at least 50% of that applicant pool into some type of hiring hub construct.
So what's the current average for the hiring time?
Current average is about 1.5 years.
It's still up to 1.5 years. Oh my gosh. All right. Get on that.
Yes, ma'am.
One last question is, I know the polygraph is sort of a bottleneck, obviously, for resources and the specific requirements for that. I'm constantly talking about this in other venues. Are you looking at other deception detection technologies before the polygraph, early on, as somebody is doing the initial interview or filling out a form, to just be able to identify whether, somebody is just definitely going to be ruled out? That's much cheaper off-the-shelf technology that might be able to help you filter quickly.
I will take the specific technology question back for the record and provide a response to you. What I can share is that there is a pre-polygraph interview process that occurs before someone actually sits in the chair. And in a number of different cases, we have seen that people have admissions during that process, which we know ultimately will render them unsuitable for employment. And when that occurs, we are able to make that judgment call earlier in the process than we did historically. And as a result, we've been able to streamline the process significantly.
Got it. I'd love to follow up with you. I've constantly talked about some technologies that are come out of the University of Arizona, but there's others around the country that are off the shelf that can really help you, I think, quickly identify whether somebody's being deceptive when they're filling out an online form or an in-person interview, just sensing other things, that it's not a full-up polygraph. So I'd be happy to follow up with you as well on that. Okay, thank you for all your patience. I want to thank the witnesses for all of your valuable testimony, answers to your questions, and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask that you will respond to these in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7E, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days. And without objection, the committee stands adjourned.